Welcome to another broadcast of the Institute for Conflicts Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab El Samurai, and I'm here with Dr. Eric Tomlinson. And today we will be discussing the archetypal dimensions of the psyche by our dear friend. We wish she was our friend anyway. Our dear departed psychoanalyst or analyst, Jungian analyst, Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz. She is one of the, I would say, the preeminent Jungians who was Jung's assistant, helper, was his student, his trainee, and remained loyal to him until he passed away and beyond. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Eric Tomlinson is going to introduce himself. Sometimes I let him, sometimes I don't. Oh, he's going to wave at us. Okay.
No, that was a naval salute.
Naval salute. Okay, remember, we are doing podcasts, so you're going to have to describe hand gestures if you need to. If you're trying to explain something with hands, you have to explain what you're explaining with the hands.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's start, Eric. Where shall we start?
I think Zeitgeist is a real good place to start.
Excellent.
Or Zeitgeist.
Let's start with the Zeitgeist. Let's talk. Tell me about the Zeitgeist.
You're asking me?
Ooh. Well, what I found interesting about von Franz, and as she talked about the Zeitgeist of the time, and how the Zeitgeist responds to and explains what is happening between the unconscious and the conscious processes. And it's usually when the unconscious is pushing up and creating friction to the conscious mind, becoming more conscious. I mean, to say unconscious means unconscious. You can find it. But whatever material is in the unconscious that starts to move, this creates an irritation, and this creates conflict. As we have seen, the zeitgeist of our day is political, racial, emotional, psychological, physical, social, ethnic, tension between the opposites or tension between the other. And you don't have to raise your hand, Eric. It's just me and you. Okay, Eric, go ahead. Speak.
Can I make a point a little bit about from a more historian point of view of what Zeitgeist is?
That's fine, but you don't have to raise your hand, especially since we're also on video. Okay. Go for it. Explain that historical.
I was trying to be polite, sir.
No. I love your politeness, but it's just me and you.
Okay. It's kind of a sum. I think I saw one definition somewhere where it was the sum of the collection of a generation. Mm-hmm. It can be of a generation or a historical time period. But basically it's the essence of the energy regarding things that are affecting the entire collective that exists at that time.
Ooh.
And Jung believed and taught, as many others believe, that carries over into subsequent generations. And he gives a heading it's called collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
But the zeitgeist is the energy behind that collective unconscious. So I just wanted to kind of frame it in that kind of.
That's perfect. That's where I will kind of like jump on from.
Okay.
because von Franz would say, von Franz would agree with you, but she would say that it's the energy within the unconscious that is brimming up and causing an irritation with the conscious, and that energy, that irritation, causes things to change or causes things to show themselves, or in a different way causes things to transform. They had one meaning and today they have a completely different meaning, but it's the same meaning. So that transformation, those things, that energy, as the way it prickles against each other, she would say it's the forces within that want to unify the opposites,
That's a good way of saying it.
that causes this. So what is the zeitgeist of our time, Eric? What do you think the biggest issue? What have we lost?
Well,
What
I've
have we
got
gained?
I've got a couple of answers to that. It depends on how conscious this unconscious collective idea is. I've been thinking a lot about this I've had many different periods of time where I've thought a lot about this. What's the number one? I think about it in interpersonal relationships, because to me, we're here to have relationships. I mean, there's no one can deny the fact that human beings are built to have relationships.
No, we are a herd animal. We like to be in groups.
Right. And so I've, I hear all the things that people say is the biggest problems of our time. And after all the history that I've studied and thought about this issue, it's clear to me, very, very clear to me, where the number one and number two problem exist on this planet. And it is conscious, but it's not in the front of our consciousness. And number one is the treatment of women. And number two is the treatment, and I'm not putting these in order, the treatment of children. I don't know of any greater suffering that's ever been done to human beings, because this exists in every country on the planet. Correct. And has from time immemorial.
Correct.
And women have always been subjugated and mistreated. It's easy for us to nowadays in the United States to not think that's a big issue, but it's still a big issue. There are more women beat up, more children beat up, more children tortured, more children made to work unbelievable, torturous hours all over the planet. And yet, the biggest thing on TV is politics or this religious group or
Eric,
our economy.
Eric, let's stay with that point. Let's go to von Franz's dream, not von Franz's dream, her patient's dream of the Black Madonna.
Okay. Thanks for letting me ramble there for a minute.
I think this connects to what you are saying. I think that the vision of the woman who had the dream of the rising Black Madonna, or the feminine of God, as von Franz would say, the feminine part of the masculine God, because she says that one of the biggest problems with the masculine God is there's no feminine aspect to him. And that's why the church needed to have the Madonna. And that the Black Madonna is an archetypal image, and this is where the people came from at the time. That was who they are. They were Black. And so to have images of that in Switzerland, in modern day Switzerland, she thought that the woman, not necessarily, even though she was political, not necessarily that it came to her as a political notion, but it came from deep within the collective unconscious to tell her about the feminine aspect of the self, or the feminine aspect of the whole.
I think that's right on target, and it gives a more focused understanding of my response. I was speaking in generalities, but that was a really good focused idea about it. I think what's interesting to me, and I'll just speak from myself. I know when I was young and in my 20s, I had grew up in a rural area, was pretty much brainwashed to think all the typical cliche oriented things that men feel about women. And when I first heard that someone say that I have a feminine side to me, I didn't really care for it. and then I met you and Murray and started recognizing, as I was working through things that would allow my anima to emerge through the barrier that I had up against it, and it's changed my whole perception of who human beings are, realizing that they have, as Jung talked about, both an anima and an animus.
Mhm.
So that's what I wanted to, that's just another point I wanted to add, if I could. I hope it ties in.
No, no, definitely it ties in. I just wanted to bring in a quote from von Franz. Of course, there's some parts of the beginning of it that's a little obnoxious. There's some um, questionable ways of talking about people's psychological processes and being. But I think it's time and place contingent. But I think that they do show sensitivity. She shows sensitivity to issues of race and color and ethnicity, yet at the same time, um, the way that it's stated in the book, which I think is a translation of a lecture, sounds comes off as demeaning. Um, Yet um, she is quite brilliant in um, being able to show humanity.
Yeah, I thought that was a strength as well, Lahab. I likened it a little bit to one of my favorite people that I like to read about or read from or of is Joseph Campbell. And she was reminding me of, in several areas in that first chapter, she was sounding like Joseph Campbell to me.
She was trying. She's still, I think, um, a woman of her time and place. But I think I mean, she's quite eloquent in the way she um, talks about how people connect and intersect. But you
I
know,
also I also like the fact, Lahab, that she talked about that many psychic tendencies, that there are a number of psychic tendencies that people have that don't just arise or aren't just quote unquote created through only through early childhood years, but that family, uh, that the unconscious family milieu that they're in has a huge impact on developing its own version or set of psychic tendencies, good and bad.
So she says on page 13, in the middle of the page, she starts, the return of pagan spiritual traditions to the West by ways of the Arab at the same time brought about a reevaluation of nature and in the Renaissance, even the world. This led, without going into details, since these are things that are much discussed nowadays, to the completely worldly orientation of the modern natural sciences as well as to rationalism of the Enlightenment. Though this rationalism was initially used by the church against those whose beliefs differed from its own, today it has cast doubt on those very beliefs themselves. National socialism and communism were large movements that caused and still cause the disintegration of the Christian belief for a large number of peoples to become evident. In Jung's view, however, there exists today in the collective unconscious a clear tendency to understand the poles of good and evil, which have split too far apart in their human psychological relativity, and to reconcile them again within the integral image of God. This reconciliation, however obvious, cannot come about only through an intermediary. And this is, according to Jung, the hitherto neglected feminine principle, which I thought when she talks about that, um,
You thought what?
I thought that when she talks about how things, ideas, how peoples have inspired other people's ideas and thoughts, and how those ideas and thoughts were then used against them because um, because they became unconscious of where they came from, and that they couldn't tolerate it. And because to tolerate that would mean that my good and my evil have to exist on something that is relative, that I could see, that I could touch both corners. It can be split into something that is completely absurd and um, something that is completely unable to be touched because it's so evil. And the point of to be one-sided is what cripples us. It helps us not see ourselves. We start to act out in different ways. And she says on page 19, whenever this kind of historic religious mythology of a people is destroyed, the people lose their feeling of belonging to a meaningful whole and become disoriented. Thus, today we see how many North American Indian tribes are forced to combat alcoholism, and declines in their birth rate decline altogether. Their mythology is destroyed, and with it, their feeling of meaning of their existence. For such people, the only goal that remains is that of acquiring material goods in the world or dying out. The young people leave the old, fall into a state of resignation, and the tribe disintegrates. Wherever our modern technological rationalism comes into contact with people still living undisturbedly within the terms of their mythology, we can see the sad picture. The department store then becomes the modern temple. And then she gives an obnoxious kind of analysis of a woman she met in Bali who um, she misses the department store in Rome. She doesn't miss the Vaticano or um, the Colosseum. So I thought, okay, Interesting start.
One of the things I get out of that is when people have, and a lot of it can be on an unconscious level, when people are stripped of their past and of their own cultural mythology and identity, they go into survival mode, and they're much more likely to compromise those that don't fight back, and they're much more likely to um, integrate into the population or group that is now over them. And even under the worst of circumstances, I'm not even talking about when there's a welcoming arms, but they're in survival mode. And we can only imagine at what damage that does to people unless you've been through it, what damage that does to your psyche and to yourself and to any hope that you have of any kind of development. If you have no input from any source anywhere that is.
Well, I think she would say, I think she would agree with you. What she would say is that it's the destruction of the mythology, destruction of the history, the story of the story that you live by, the myth that you go by as a human being on this planet. That gives you a sense of meaning in this world. And it keeps you holding on to certain things even through the worst of times, because you come from such and such stock, or some tough family, or your great grandfather, climbed Mount Everest, or stuff like that, and it keeps us moving ahead in the world. And I think the more stories like that, the more mythology that we lose. I think that's why we have this the present zeitgeist of all these superheroes coming to life.
I agree.
Every single type of superhero, they're flawed, they're young, they're trying to save something. They're trying to, and there's a reason for that mythology to appear, because we need to be saved, because we are at a point where we have given up on our environment. The environment will survive. This planet will survive without us, and this planet will grow, and everything will come back. We don't have to. So, as just one of the things that is being destroyed today, trust between the older generation and the younger generation, although that's always been up for and always had a disconnect, now there's no trust. They've lost complete trust in the older generation. The older generation doesn't. But there are like symbolic heroes and grandfathers. Like Joe Biden is a grandfather. He's like you know, he's the old king who comes to restore stability and honor amongst the people. I mean, these are the mythologies that we live by. These are the mythologies that bring us hope in our modern day. And I think what von Franz would say is this is the zeitgeist of the moment. Is the zeitgeist is that we have serious issues in the world, but we've neglected them for so long for material wealth. To gorge ourselves with things. And to punish ourselves for not wanting to be out there without things. Things become what defines us, not who our character is, but things that we have. So if you have a lot of money, you're defined as an important thing. If you don't have any money, then you're not anything. And that's how we started defining ourselves. And I think this is why we live in a very, very difficult, very conflicted time. And I think, yeah, I think the fight of good and evil is so highlighted is because it's the time.
And there's so much wealth and resources, and there's only a certain amount of people on the planet that can relatively easily obtain that wealth and those resources.
Tiny sliver of people on this planet control this planet.
Yes.
Control almost all the resources of what is below and above this planet. And that is outrageous, because what that has done is created this vast population of people who have zero. Because for that little people to own so much, that means a lot of people go out with nothing. So that causes great disparity. And when it causes great disparity, that creates a great pain for the world. We are a living organism. There's a lot of psychic pain out there. There's a reason that we have psychic pain. If we want to heal the world, we need to heal the psychic pain. We need to reach out and make sure that people have food. I mean, for the United States of America, this is ridiculous, though. We have people waiting in food lines. We should not have that. We feed the world 20 times over in a single day.
I read some research that said that the food waste that we throw out in America would, in 1 year, would feed half the world. It was a third of the world. That's just from the stuff that we throw out.
That's what we throw out, but that's not what we produce. What we produce is ridiculous.
Yeah.
The amounts of food that we produce, and for our people to go hungry with the amount of food that we produce, is criminal. It's criminal that people need food when food should be abundant. It shouldn't be a natural resource. Food, water, medical care, housing, natural resource. We need to build better planet. What this is, so we acquire. So what we have learned from materialism is what? We've learned that we have to have a whole planet for garbage, because now plastic fills the ocean. You cannot float in the ocean without a piece of plastic hitting you, because the garbage is being dumped in the ocean, because we have no room for garbage. And we created like plastic that can it can't be destroyed. It exists.
When I was in the Navy, I was on the back of my destroyer. The first time out to sea, we were in the Mediterranean.
We're PG, right?
Pardon?
PG.
DD?
PG. Keep us PG.
PT? What's PT?
PG, like in the movies.
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course. And I was standing on the back of the ship, and I noticed that there was this work crew loading up all these giant garbage bags into this big pyramid on the back of the ship. And I go, we're not going to be in port for another couple of days. Why are you putting us out here now? It's going to start stinking. Ooh. They said, no, we punch holes of it and throw it in the ocean. Ooh. I said, you do what? Now, this is 1973.
Yeah, I don't think this happens anymore.
But I was shocked. Well, don't count on that, my friend.
Well, so
And every ship and of all the navies of all the world do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that we've run out of space for this materialism. Because the more shit you buy, the more shit you have to throw out. That's a fact. The more plastic you buy, the more plastic you have to buy, the more bottle, everything has to be thrown out. So we don't know how to recycle. We have not learned how to recycle. We've learned how to dump shit in oceans, which is a terrible thing. We don't know how to use one bag. It's like we've forgotten how to use one bag. You know, we actually can use one bag. It's not difficult. I used to go to the grocery store in Iraq all the time. I had one bag. I took it from home. I filled it up and I brought this back. One bag. It was concept, very ancient society. So very tricky. But one bag. You don't need more than one bag. But you go to store, how many bags do you get? You get 30 bags. What do you need 30 bags for? They double bag it for you. Now they're charging you for it. They're charging you to create more waste. Why? Unnecessary. That's just a simple example, is because a lot of the garbage is plastic bags.
Yeah, a couple of months ago, I heard I heard on the news where they had developed a new plastic made out of peas.
Ooh.
So, and that's great, but it's going to be, it'll be 50 years before that is throughout the planet,
Well, no, they have to find solutions to problems. They've created problems that have
and
no
they're
solution.
and they're trying to, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years and even decades
But
for a lot of these problems.
they created it in a very short time. So
No,
they should take break and invest in uncreating. I am sure that the money that these places have been able to accumulate over time, like Coca-Cola and all these other companies that use plastics for whatever reason, besides their drink. I mean, what we're talking about is that these places are creating something that needs to be uncreated. And we as individuals have so much capacity. They, as corporations like Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and all these other corporations, they have power. They could actually uncreate the problems they have created over time. But that requires investment, because that means that you lose money for a while. And how dare we lose money for a while and invest in something and create something? At the beginning, they were even talking about charging for the vaccine. Okay, you're charging a dying world for a vaccine that it desperately needs. How do you set up hunger games for that? Now we have the resources for the vaccine, but the rest of the world doesn't. What that means is that we have created our own enclave, but it's not helpful, because we like moving around in the world. We like bringing shit from the rest of the world. The rest of the world likes coming here. So it's very difficult to just vaccinate ourselves and leave the rest of the world to float by, because that problem will come back to hurt us.
yes.
As usual. So it's an interesting day. We have hope. There is vaccine.
Well, I mentioned at the beginning, a couple of just two. There are certainly more than two, but just two of what I thought were some of the biggest, if not the biggest, zeitgeist topics.
Ooh.
But we look into a whole nother category, which is survival. And now we get into environment, food,
It's everything. We're
water,
interconnected.
everything that we need to survive.
We're interconnected.
That's part of the zeitgeist problems and issues we have now.
We're interconnected. The corporations are directly interconnected to us as a microorganism. We drink what they make. We eat what they make. We are interconnected. So This is a connection at the core level. This is
There's
a
a passage.
connection we have to change. We have to change our genes. This is what we use CRISPR for, which I'd love to talk about one day on this podcast. Gene editing and the
Yeah.
world of gene editing. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really, I mean, fascinating. So, um, well, I think that what I am hoping for is next week. Um, Karen and Lisa will be back, hopefully. Um, but to read about the Antichrist or Merlin, um, a problem inherited from the Middle Ages. And this is about the bipolarity of good and evil. And shall we do the chapter after that, the transformed berserker, Eric?
Seeing how long it is. Whoa, that's a very, very long chapter.
Okay, so let's just do the Antichrist or Merlin for the problem inherited from the Middle Ages. For next week's individuation podcast, we will be continuing to discuss the archetypal dimensions of the psyche by Marie-Louise von Franz. And I am Dr. Lahab El Samurai. With me is Dr. Eric Tomlinson, and we are part of the IFC's Individuation podcast. And I want to bid you adieu for today. Eric, would you like to say goodbye?
Uh, be safe and be at peace, everyone.
With that, we leave you till next week.